and Son of God. That's Messiah, Lord, Son of God by virtue of his resurrection from the dead. That's another one of those creedal texts. Here's another one. This is my favorite, and I'm not going to be talking about deity of Christ much, but I want to throw this one in for free. This is a great one. Another one of these early creedal texts is Romans 10:9. Many evangelicals memorize it. Part of the Romans Road, one of our best-known verses. If you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God's raised him from the dead, you will be saved. Now, some people say, all right, Lord, that's a pretty lofty term. It is the Greek translation of the Old Testament Jehovah. Pretty lofty. But it can also mean sir. It can also mean, to your boss, my Lord, or to a king, or to a governor. How do we know which one he's calling Jesus? If you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord, how do you know which one Paul means? Because 3 verses later, same context, he quotes Joel. Whoever calls upon the name of the Lord will be saved. That's Jehovah. And he just got done saying, if you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord, what do I mean? Well, by doing this, you'll be saved. He cites Lord again, and it's Jehovah. You get a pretty good idea of where he's going. Confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord. Believe in your heart that God has raised him from the dead. So the order is like this: deity, resurrection, death. In Romans 10:9. So there's a little bit about deity, because you can do this with deity too. You can go back and use data, which we get 2 things here. Critics not only allow this as the early proclamation, but you also get it, it goes back. Paul got it from somebody else. When's Paul writing this? Early in the 50s. If he's got it from others, you're coming back in here somewhere. And you're going to see in a little while that we can get all the way back to there. All right? So, Paul's writing about here, 55 AD, and he says, Christ died for our sins, according to the Scriptures, was buried, and rose again the 3rd day, according to the Scriptures, and appeared. And here comes a list of, really, the list is 2 individuals and 3 groups to which Paul appends his own name. Last of all, he appeared to me. So it turns out that's not part of this creedal deal. Paul adds it. He says, and I'm there too. I saw Christ. But if you put Paul's in there, there's 3 individuals, 3 groups, 500, the 12, all the apostles. This is a very early message. How early? Now remember, what do we want out of the deal? For right now, I got more after lunch, but for right now, to me, the most important things, you're doing historiography, early eyewitnesses. Not all eyewitnesses are early, and not everybody who's early is an eyewitness. Can eyewitnesses be wrong? They could be mistaken. That's why we have naturalistic theories. You know that the New Testament reports 5 different naturalistic theories regarding the resurrection. 3 of them were cooked up by Christians. So people think of these alternative views, but the point is, every one is refuted multiple times, multiple ways, and that's why most critics today don't even take the alternative views. That's amazing. So, do we have those early eyewitnesses? Answer, yes. Paul starts here. Now, folks, even if he started here, I could stop and I could say, any questions? We're done. Because what is this? Paul's an eyewitness, and he's writing just 25 years later. That's great. That's fantastic. Michael Martin, well-known atheist philosopher. You say, well, everybody quotes, all skeptics quote the New Testament? Yes, they do. How about Michael Martin, famous atheist? Here's Michael Martin. The Apostle Paul is the only eyewitness to a resurrection appearance whose testimony we have. Now, what's he saying? He's saying he doesn't trust Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. But he's telling you that Paul's authoritative. And Paul's is an eyewitness source. Now we got this question you have many times. You say, well, should I sit here and argue about these books? Some people do. Or should I go with what he gives me? Paul. I'm going to go with what all critics grant. Paul's testimony. Paul's the critic's hero. He's in the right place at the right time. He was a scholar. He was a critic. He changed because of this message. He met the risen Jesus. He's an eyewitness. When you're in Paul's home court, you're dealing with the most authoritative guy. Everyone says that. Everyone allows it. And of the 13 books that bear Paul's name in the New Testament, critics, no matter how critical they are, the atheist New Testament scholar that we're just debating recently, this is a written debate, it's for Oxford University Press, he allows at least 6 to 8 of Paul's books as authoritative. And you know the books he allows? You know what the books all the critics allow? The books that you most want, the books that we go to first. Here's the books that all critics allow from, well, I think, you know what? I do this for a living. I read these guys for a living. I map them. I have a document on my computer, almost 600 pages long, where critics are today on 140 sub-questions regarding the death, burial, resurrection of Jesus. I can think of one scholar who will dispute what I'm going to tell you. One out of 3,300 sources I have. One. And he will even talk seriously. He'll let you use all this. It's not his view, but he'll let you use all this. He treats it seriously. Only one. And here's the books they give you. Romans, 1st and 2nd Corinthians, Galatians, Philippians, 1 Thessalonians, and Philemon. At least those. Now here's the question again. Do you want to go, no, if you don't give me all 13, I won't talk to you? Or do you say, hey, you're in my terrain, or I'm in your terrain, I'm in the State University campus. You're going to give me 6? I'll give you 6. I'll take 6. You know, I can't prove 13 to you tonight anyway. Besides, that's not my purpose. My purpose is to argue resurrection on this campus, wherever it is. And I'm going to take your 6. In fact, I started out by saying I'm only going to use 2 texts, 1 Corinthians 15, Galatians 1 and 2. You don't get arguments. Use it. It's fine. It's authoritative. Doesn't mean Paul's infallible. This is the critic's view. Doesn't mean Paul's infallible, but you can use him because he's a great authority. All right, I'll use him. I'll take what you give me. I could stop right here. And I've already given you reasons. Why do they take Paul seriously? Just 25 years later, Michael Martin says he's the only eyewitness to a resurrection appearance we have. Well, I want to dispute that. In fact, I'm going to tell you how to dispute it today. But I'll take that for a starter. He's authoritative, right time, right place. Let's talk about Paul. So he says right here, Jesus' deity, died on the cross for your sins, was raised from the dead, and he appeared. And here's 6 appearances, 3 to individuals if you count the one that Paul adds, 3 to groups, and he says, I got this from other people. Now, Paul's a scholar. I don't think Paul's going to take this material from people who aren't good witnesses. But nonetheless, we'll show you they were good witnesses. From whom and when did Paul receive this material? All right. This is when Paul wrote it. Notice first 2 verses. This is what I preached when I came to your town. Oh, so it's a little bit earlier still. Yes, it is. When did he come to Corinth? Some people argue this is the most clearly delineated date in the New Testament, even clearer than the death of Jesus. Paul came to Corinth approximately 51 AD. And this is dated from an inscription, a secular archaeological inscription. Very, very trustworthy. So, you all with me so far? Just getting started with the human PowerPoint. Paul wrote it. Paul spoke it before he wrote it. Now, I want to know, when and from whom did he get this material? I've been saying this for 20 years with all kinds of data. There's things on my website. If I don't say this now, I'll forget it. GaryHabermas.com. Nothing's for sale on that website. But under the articles tab, under the video, under the audio, you can see debates, you can see articles, you can see chapters from books under the books tab. There's a couple books there on doubt. You can see this argued out. But rather than citing me, I'll cite the aforementioned Richard Bauckham, Cambridge University, formerly St. Andrews University in Scotland. Bauckham says the consensus New Testament position, whether you're an atheistic New Testament professor, skeptical New Testament professor, moderate New Testament professor, evangelical New Testament professor, the consensus position is that Paul received this material. about 35 AD. Now you notice we're only plus 5. Plus 5. Almost nothing beats that in the ancient world. In fact, Hans von Kampenhausen, a liberal German historian, says, this text in 1 Corinthians 15 answers everything you could possibly ask from an ancient historical text. Here's Howard Clark Key in his book, What Can We Know About Jesus? Cambridge University Press. First time I met him, in fact, the only time I've been with him, he was arguing the agnostic position. Here's how he starts his book, What Can We Know About Jesus? He says there's some data in the New Testament that are so good that you could take it into a law court and win a positive verdict. And what does he list there? 1 Corinthians 15, 3 and following. That's an agnostic argument? So Paul gets this data, about there I guess, about 35 AD. How do you get that? Turn to the other passage. End of Galatians 1, and then we'll be moving over to the beginning of Galatians 2. But in Galatians 1, Paul starts giving us testimony. Remember, the theme of the book is the gospel. Paul's giving us testimony, and he says, I was a persecutor of the church. Wasn't a good guy. But God got a hold of me. Verse 16, he revealed Jesus to me. Verse 18. Now, he said, when I came to Christ, I didn't go running up to Jerusalem to see those who were apostles before me. I didn't go running up there. But 3 years later, I went up to Jerusalem and I met with 2 of them. He said, I spent 15 days with Peter and James, the brother of Jesus. I guess if I would like to have been present for any post-resurrection New Testament event, I'd like to have been at that meeting and be able to understand, presumably Aramaic, maybe Greek. But he said, I spent 15 days with Peter, and I didn't see anybody else but James, the brother of Jesus. If you're Paul, what are you going to ask Peter and James over 15 days? Since my students know the answer to almost every apologetic question will come back eventually to the resurrection, I would ask Peter this, if I'm Paul. I'll tell you what I saw in my resurrection appearance if you tell me what you saw. In fact, I want you to tell me how in 15 days they didn't discuss this topic, especially when the theme of the book in which the story is told is the nature of the gospel. Most critics believe that Paul got this information from Peter and James right here. And there's a little Greek word, actually it's kind of a long Greek word, in Galatians 1:18, but the root word is small. The Greek word is hysteresai. The root word is histor, H-I-S-T-O-R. It's the Greek word from which we get our word history. Now, it's illegitimate, as many New Testament scholars have warned us, to take a word and say, oh yeah, that's the word from which we get our word history, so it must be history. Now, you need to know how the word was being used back then. And the word histor was used in papyri of this time as 2 non-evangelical word studies say, the closest we can get to what histor means is what we would call eyewitness news. I'm the eyewitness reporter. And it's used, in one case it's used of a fellow who was making a geographical map of a river. And instead of taking people's words, brought to what's around the turn and where's the fast water and where's the slow water and where do I portage my canoe and where are the drop-offs and what's dangerous and where are the towns and where can I get some food, and he went himself